is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's tied. He throws. It is.
Welcome, one and all, to the Past Our Prime podcast, your weekly look back at sports from half a century ago through old issues of Sports Illustrated. And on the cover of the April 21st, 1975 issue of SI, the Golden Bear, after he wore the green jacket for a fifth time in one of the most famous Masters tournaments of all time. I'm Scott Johnston, joined by Mark Hoffman and Bill Mahoney. How goes things, guys?
How are you?
That was quite a Masters they had 50 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, my God. Quite a Masters they had this weekend with Rory McIlroy winning finally.
Yeah.
So I loved it. Rory McIlroy at the end of the one, as he's walking off the green, he goes, "I'll be right back. I got to go get a green jacket." That's great. But yeah, this is one in 75 in terms of that excitement, in terms of three guys that were at the top of their game. Woo, what an amazing ending.
So when we worked in television on a daily basis, and for those of you at home, that pretty much means nights, weekends, and holidays, there is a TV on almost the entire time you're at work. And we all spent a good portion of our time working for CBS affiliates. And on weekends, for much of the year, that means golf. You kind of had to watch it. It was always on. I grew to like it, especially on Sundays and, of course, the big tournaments. But my question to you both is, now that you don't work in that environment, do you watch golf at all anymore? I do not. I have not watched one hole of golf on live TV since I stopped working in TV, over about 2 years ago right now. So do you guys watch it ever?
If I follow along online and it looks like there's going to be a really good ending, I will turn it on. Like the Masters, I thought, wow, Rory and Bryson DeChambeau and Justin Rose, they're all there. So I thought, I'll turn it on. But if I look up and, whatever, DeChambeau's leading a tournament by 6 strokes and it's in the final round, no.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the last round, a little bit of it, because I was in a restaurant and they had the game it on. I was interested in seeing if McIlroy could do it, but no. I mean, I don't really watch golf. If there's golf on and I'll see a putt, I'll watch the putt, and that's about it. But yeah, no, I don't really follow golf.
Which is funny because, like I said, I grew to like it, and if you watch it every week, you start to know not just the great players, but the other guys that are like in contention all the time. And golf is really like one of those sports where the drama builds and builds and builds, and then all of a sudden that 16th, 17th hole on Sunday is like, wow. But yeah, it's a lot, right? First of all, it's like 5 or 6 hours. Yeah. So that's your whole day. Scorecard, Bill, start us off.
I don't have a scorecard.
Oh, well then screw you.
I know, exactly. Yeah. Oh, I can make one up.
I've got one for you.
Go.
I got George Foreman, after the Ali fight, he is going to fight in, I believe it was April. He's going to fight 5 guys in one night in Toronto at Maple Leafs Garden. 5 dudes, man. And he beat all 5 dudes. And 3 of them was actually knockouts. But, he's getting tired after a while. It's just one guy coming in after another. They're all journeymen.
Yeah, they were not very good.
No. And the thing in Sports Illustrated said there was a guy a few years earlier named Lamar Clark in 1958 who was a much ballyhooed heavyweight. And he fought 6 guys in the same evening, but it was a dud. And he retired a few years later because he got flattened in the second round by a 19-year-old newcomer named Cassius Clay, a.k.a. Muhammad Ali. But
Now I know none
I
of those
was
guys
thinking
might not have been good, but would we have ever gotten in the ring with any of those guys? Boone,
not a chance.
Kirkpatrick.
No, not a chance.
As long
But
as they can punch, they're good.
what I liked about him fighting five guys, it's like a Bruce Lee movie. He'd fight
Yeah.
like 50 guys, but they all would come at him one at a time.
Right.
That always
Screw
was
that,
weird.
man.
You're right.
I'm coming from behind with five other guys, man, and I've got like, a wrench in my hand. I'm
Yeah.
not fighting you legit.
Mark's playing to win.
That's
They
right.
did though, Mark. You think about that. You're right. They'd have like 9 guys and they'd all take their turns getting their butt kicked. And I've been
Right.
thinking, why not just rush him at once? He's like, yeah.
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 Yeah, I think they did that pretty much in the Karate Kid too,
That's right. That's right.
Oh. I'll go. A lot of folks at the University of Illinois were upset when basketball coach Gene Bartow begged out of his 5-year contract that it had 4 years to go. He left to go and be John Wooden's successor at UCLA. By way of protest, 50 students marched outside Bartow's office and serenaded him with the Illinois loyalty song. Only one trouble. They didn't know the words, so some of them had to read it from sheet music. So I'm not sure how loyal they were to the University of Illinois.
Yeah, and you know what? If Bartow could have been in a time machine, he might not have taken the UCLA job, knowing all the stress it would cause him. Because he ended up at UAB and at Birmingham. He had some really good teams.
Yep.
I'm gonna take a left here on that, saying not knowing the words. How many times do we know just the hook of a song?
Oh my God.
And you know nothing. I remember sitting on the beach once back in the 70s and singing Cat Scratch Fever. Cat Scratch Fever. And everyone's singing it. You knew no other words. All
Yes.
you did was sing Cat Scratch Fever.
My wife and my daughters, but especially my older daughter, I mean, they can hear like a song twice and they know all the lyrics. I mean, it's just, and I can know. First of all, I get the lyrics wrong all the time. I think for like 30 years, I thought Boston's Piece of Mind was Piece of Pie. I was like, well, why wouldn't it be a piece of pie?
The best was REM. They mumbled a lot of their songs, and you could not understand. You needed subtitles.
Yeah.
I do find though, as you get older and you start listening to the words, some of the songs are pretty bad.
Oh gosh, yes.
Like Message in a Bottle is like about stalking or something. And I'm thinking,
Right.
no, it's just Message in a Bottle. I'm thinking, what's the other, maybe it wasn't Message in a Bottle. It was the other Sting
Yeah,
one.
it's
I'm
every breath
watching
you
you or
take.
something.
Every breath you
Every
take.
breath you take, I'll be
That's
watching
it.
you.
Yeah.
That's it. And the one from John Mayer about supposed to be Jennifer Love Hewitt's figure.
Right.
You're beautiful. I kept thinking, I just thought it was a song. And then you listen to the words and you go, oh, he's murdering 9 people. Sorry, don't like it anymore.
Well, I listened to Mr. Roboto the other day, and I'm like, I think I used to like this song.
Yes. And what's the other one? The Pina Colada song about him cheating.
Right.
And then he finds out his
Oh.
wife. I listened to the words a few years ago and thought, oh, he put out an ad to meet for champagne. And I thought, oh, I just was singing the song. I'm like, oh, what a nice song.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this before, but Mara, my wife, is a big country music fan. We first met, so I was trying to find a country song that I'd like, and Garth Brooks had a song called "As the Thunder Rolls."
Yeah.
I liked the song a lot, and I said, "Hey, that could be her song." She looked at me and said, "You know what it's about?" "Oh no, it's about a wife shooting her two-timing husband."
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
I used to play that on the country music station in Wichita
Yes.
Falls and go, what
Yes.
a great
So,
song, Thunder Roll.
Not a good song to use for a married couple.
Well,
I did not know
it's
that.
okay for you to suggest it. It was really good for Mara to say no.
I know. Exactly.
If she had said yes,
Your
it would
dad,
just be Bill and I.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
God.
your thunder would have been rolled.
Yeah, it would have been.
They said it, Mark. Who said what?
Tug McGraw, Philly's famous relief pitcher, on making $75,000 a year in the mid-70s. Wow. He said, 90% I'll spend on good times, women, and Irish whiskey. The other 10% I'll probably waste.
One of his most famous quotes.
That's great.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
great.
perfect.
And of course, we all know his son, Tim McGraw. So
It'd be interesting to see what he would consider wasting.
Probably,
Yes.
buying a car.
Right. Paying bills.
Yes.
You're all right, Jack. Dan Jenkins writes the story of the 75 Masters, and he begins by casting Robert Redford to play both Jack Nicklaus and Johnny Miller, and James Caan to play Tom Weiskopf. That's because the 4 days in Augusta plays out like a scripted thriller. Nicklaus led Weiskopf by 6 strokes and Miller by 11 at the halfway mark of the tournament, and then hung on for dear life. On Saturday, Jack shoots a 73. Weiskopf overtakes him by shooting a 66 to go up a stroke. Miller shoots a 65 to close within 3 strokes of Nicklaus and 4 of Weiskopf heading into Sunday. And despite the fine play from the likes of Billy Casper, Lee Trevino, and Arnold Palmer, this was a 3-man tournament with 18 holes left to play. They make the turn with Jack and Weiskopf tied. Miller is 2 back. Jenkins writes, there is an old saying that the real Masters doesn't begin until the back 9 on Sunday. It's a tiresome thing to point out, but it continues to be true. 50 years later, that still holds true. Mark, Jack's competition had their chances. What happened to Johnny Miller over the last 9 holes?
Well, first of all, Johnny had shot a 65 and a 66. He actually was playing some really, really good golfs. And he had 15 birdies through about 2 rounds. But that back 9, he was not so effective, but he still had a chance at 18. If he sinks the birdie putt at 18, we have a playoff. And I believe back then it would have been an 18-hole playoff on the next day on Monday. They later changed that rule. So it could have been a 3-way playoff, but 18 holes they would have had to play. But Miller misses the shot, and that left it up to Weiskopf to try to force the playoff. Miller came up one putt short.
And Bill, what about Weiskopf? Always the bridesmaid, right?
Doggone right. And he had it. I mean, or at least he had a shot. These last 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th on the back 9, absolutely amazing. Because the setup was Nicklaus is on 16, Weiskopf's on 15, and they can hear and see what the other one's doing. So Nicklaus is there. Weiskopf, beautiful birdie putt on 15. He takes the lead, new leader. All of a sudden, Nicklaus, 35 feet from the hole, 35 feet uphill, boom, sinks it, ties him. Everyone's excited. It was absolutely a phenomenal shot. I actually watched a little bit. Then Weiskopf comes back and bogeys the 16th hole. So basically, Nicklaus pars his way in out. Weiskopf, Miller at the end. Weiskopf's ball fades to the right next to the hole, right next to it. It's heartbreaking because Weiskopf, let me say, I think I wrote it down here. He never won a Masters. He finished second 4 times. And then they talked to him afterwards. He said, I can't believe I lost this tournament. The luck balances out. It comes down to the last hole, and you hit a good drive, a good approach shot, and a good putt, and it stays out. All I know, one of these days, the putt is going to go in, and I'll win a Masters. Obviously, that never did happen. He was a great golfer. He only actually won 1 major, the Open Championship in '73, but that doesn't take away about how an amazing golfer he was. But that final 4 holes was just, I mean, breathtaking, even though you know what's going to happen. I knew what was going to happen, but watching it, you just felt like you were there. Phenomenal.
Yeah, it's a famous shot by Nicklaus, and then, like you said, both Weiskopf and Miller have their chances.
Yep.
And come up just short.
But Nicklaus, to be on a hill, to actually hit that ball up, curve it, and sink it, I mean, it just shows you, arguably, some people say Tiger Woods, the greatest golfer of all time in Jack Nicklaus.
18 majors will say that.
Yeah, man, ice in his veins.
Yeah. There was another storyline at the 75 Masters, Mark. What was it?
Lee Elder. He became the first African-American golfer to participate in the Masters. And unfortunately, it didn't go his way. He didn't make the cut, but it was still a monumental, achievement. And it's a shame that it took to 1975 for something like that to happen.
Yeah. Yep. We had Leon, not Leon. I take that back. Lee was the focus of our March 10th issue. He's no longer with us. He's deceased. So we had Laurie Livesey, the PGA Tour historian, on, and he had an interesting story about how Lee and his family stayed at Augusta during that week. They had to rent 2 houses because of all the death threats that he was receiving for playing. And that way they wouldn't know which house if they decided to kill all of them. So that's always nice.
Yes.
Dang, terrible.
A city on pinstripes and needles. Bobby Bonds and Catfish Hunter make their Yankees debuts. Bobby says he doesn't look like a Yankee, would go on to strike out with the bases loaded. Ron Fimwright writes about Catfish and his even more celebrated fellow San Francisco Bay Area refugee Jim Catfish Hunter, fresh out of the clown suits favored by his previous employer, threw 2 home run pitches and lost his first start as a Yankee. Now, clown suits. Look, Mark is our uniform guy, and I'll give you that. Some of those 70s uniforms were god awful, but those A's uniforms were
sharp.
They were great, especially the all white with green back then. But yes, were they the Yankee pinstripes? No, they were definitely different, but I loved those uniforms.
Well, the A's were the first team that wore like a colored jersey, the green or the yellow for their jersey. Everybody was either gray or light blue road uniforms. They were the first ones that did it. And that started a trend in the 70s. I mean, I remember the Orioles had these bright orange like jerseys that got a little out of control. But I have to comment on one other thing. I'm looking at the pictures in the Sports Illustrated article, and there's a shot the Yankees were playing the Tigers, and Tom Verizor, who we talked about, because he was one of the rookies of the top rookies they were looking at that year in 75. And he's sliding into home plate, and Thurman Munson's there to greet him. But the way it's angled, it looks like they're having a very intimate moment.
It sure does. Yeah.
It's like
Tommy V.
Not now. Everybody's watching.
Get your mind out of the gutter there, Hoffman.
We're talking bowling?
Bonds would hit 32 home runs and steal 30 bases in 75, but he was right. He didn't look like a Yankee, and Bill, he gets traded to the Angels.
That's shocking, because the Angels only gave up Mickey Rivers and Ed Figueroa. So, hey, there you go. And then
what did they do?
Lasted a year, and he was traded for along with Richard Dotson, for Dave Frost and Chris Knapp and Brian Downing.
Well, there's something you have to understand about the Yankees. From 1920 to 1964, this was the dominant team in baseball.
Yeah.
I mean, they were always in a World Series or winning a World Series since they got Babe Ruth till 64. But now, from 1964, now we're in the year 75, they have not been back to the World Series. This is hard times. This is over a decade for this franchise. And 75 wouldn't be their year, but it was the cusp of them becoming relevant again and being in a World Series and winning championships.
Yeah. And let me talk a little bit about the Catfish Hunter angle in that magazine, because he had just signed that big contract from the A's. So there was that pressure on him. And he started 0-3, giving up 21 runs in 25 2/3 innings. That's his first 4 starts. But he finished 23-14, 2.58.
Yeah, so 2.58 ERA, career high 30 complete games, and a career high 328 innings pitched.
What? I mean, honestly, if any manager would allow him to do that nowadays, that'd be just, I mean, your mind would explode if you saw at the end of the year, oh yeah, name pitcher did, 30 complete games.
Yeah, it was a different time, no question. The once and future league, the WFL, is trying to stay afloat against all odds, and Chris Hemmeter is the guy with the money attempting to keep the fledgling league going. 75 was supposed to be the season in which Zonka, Kick, and Warfield made the jump from the NFL to the WFL and brought with them name recognition to the World Football League. That did happen, but Kenny Stabler, L.C. Greenwood, and a few others who signed deals to leave the NFL for the WFL, now changing their minds, say that they were a breach of contracts allowed them to stay with their original NFL team. So WFL doing everything they can to make this work, but it does not have a happy ending.
Yeah, it says it comes down to one guy, Joe Namath.
Right.
That they failed to land Namath, and that forced the network out of the TVS to back out of its TV deal, and the league eventually folded.
The Chicago Winds were supposed to get Namath.
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't want to play in the Windy City. But it's interesting. It's the second season of the WFL. They're scheduled to have 18 games over a 20-week period. And 4 teams from the original year, I think, were the Hawaiians, the Southern California Sun, the Philadelphia Bell, and I would say the Memphis Southmen. So, and then they bring on these other teams in, but it just doesn't work. Like I say, they lose the TV contract and they shut down on October 22nd. There's no World Bowl, and the league is history. And
Joe Namath was name recognition
Yes.
only
Right.
because he was he
not the quarterback.
that's
yes.
about when he came to the Rams, right? And he was
Yep.
not the same at
No.
all. So
But that name. Well, let me ask
Too
you
many
guys a
names.
question. Would you play any professional sports for free? If
Oh,
you
yeah.
knew that you were going to get, maybe someone would hear about you, would you do it?
Yes, I would play baseball. I'd be a pitcher for free because do you know how many people would be, hey, look, there's this 65-year-old guy who hasn't played baseball since like Little League.
Still
and
throwing gas. That's
Yeah,
right.
he's playing for the Tigers. He can't get anyone out. I'd be on every interview show. I'd get commercial deals. Oh, this would be great. My
That's
YouTube
exactly.
would blow up. Oh yeah,
I like that. That's a very good point.
Yeah,
So 65 would get you somewhere.
and the first time some hitter takes one right back through the box
Dead.
at 110 miles an hour, Mark's walking off the mound. I'm done.
If he's not being stretchered off.
The first player I throw a strike to, or the first player gets out, will want to kill me because they'd be so embarrassed.
Well, no, I'm just saying because the Florida's Tommy Raymond, he led the WFL in rushing and shared the MVP honors 1974. He received no salary the whole year.
Did it lead to anything?
He played with the Chiefs for 1 year, ran for 700 yards, a few touchdowns. So he did actually parlay it, but in those days, I guess you play through all the injuries, but one shot of the knee and you have nothing to show for it.
Yeah. Exercise you later, alligator. Boy, this Arthur Jones, he was quite a character, wasn't he?
Oh my God. He's posing with all those alligators. He's nuts, man.
Is that the one-eyed alligator that he has out in his little moat so you get into his house?
Yeah, he's got looks like 30 alligators there. I'm sorry, that's crazy. But he's really interesting because, he invented the Nautilus machines. And gyms popped up in the 70s and 80s. And I worked at a place called Nautilus Plus. And these Nautilus machines, which before then it was like the Schwarzenegger lifting, it was heavy weights, bulky muscles. And Nautilus was more, I think, it was quicker, shorter, high intensity, wear yourself out, and you have longer, leaner muscles from it. And it was a game changer.
Yeah, I think I told you guys this, for 5 or 6 years, a Soloflex machine.
Yeah.
It was somewhat Nautilus, where it was basically you're pushing against resistance. It had these bands. Yeah. And so, your 10-pound weight only weighed like a pound and a half. It depended on the rubber, how tight it was and how you had to push it up to make it expand and stuff. And it was great. I could bring it with me places, and it was.
Where is it now?
I traded it for a car.
Oh, hey, there you go. There you go. The guy that invented the Nautilus had many great stories about how he killed elephants and people too. That he was bitten by poisonous snakes, has a jaguar who slept in his daughter's bed. Arthur Jones made himself quite a bit of money and had friends in sports, and he was a very interesting man. Very interesting man. He helped Casey Viator, 1971's Mr. America title after training on Nautilus equipment. Yeah.
Yep. Those kind of.
It's just those losers that ride Pelotons. Those are the guys that I think are a joke.
Yeah. Who would do that?
No one.
Wimpy guys, guys that take long hikes and ride Peloton machines. What's wrong with them?
Rollerball. Now, Mark, this one has you written all over it. A movie that spawned a pretty violent sport.
Well, little fact, you didn't know I was in the Rollerball Hall of Fame. I was, I guess, I was on the Tokyo
career.
team.
Yes.
Right. That I remember when Rollerball came out, and they did a remake that was weak, but the original Rollerball was great. And I remember this article because I saw this article and said, I got to see the movie. And it's like, corporations are running this dangerous sport. And it starts off where you can get hurt, but, besides that, no one was dying. And then it starts morphing into people are dying in the final game. James Caan is like the last person alive at the end of the game. It's just brutal. But it was kind of neat,
It's an interesting movie.
Yeah.
I mean, considering if you watched it nowadays, how something like rollerball with your UFC and other, bare knuckle fighting
Yeah.
is sort of something that you could see happen. Guys beating each other up to get this little metal ball in a goal. It was, and
And the movie was shot sort of documentary style.
yeah,
It had more realistic flavor to it.
yeah.
And it's supposed to guess what year this is supposed to take place in? Anyone have any
No,
idea?
what is that?
2018.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
already
Well,
happened. We
close,
just missed it.
close. Now let me ask,
That's
did you
one
guys did you guys ever did you guys ever like roller derby when you were kids?
Yeah, oh,
I would
gosh.
watch a little bit.
So did I. The T-Birds. Oh yeah.
Yep.
Ralphie
And the T-Birds would always be
Valaderos.
losing. And they would have this great rally at the end to win the
Rowdy
game.
Roddy
Oh.
Piper.
No, Roddy Piper was a wrestler.
Wrestler.
Ronnie
He was a wrestler.
Psycho Reigns.
That's
Yeah.
it. Thank
Yeah.
you. Psycho Reigns. That's
I
right.
think they had
That's
the
right.
San Francisco Bombers, was it?
They had
San Francisco
women as
Bombers?
well. So yeah, Skinny
Yep.
Minnie and Ralphie Valaderos. Yeah, and you're right. They were always losing, whatever the score was, 99-93, and they needed 7 points in the last minute to win. And they got it every time.
Yep.
In the Land of the Giants, part 3 of 4 of Leo Durocher's series from his book Nice Guys finished last. And this time the former Dodgers player and manager is writing about the 1951 season. Next week, we have Gar Hurd on the show to talk about his famous NBA shot heard around the world. But the original one, well, if you don't count the American Revolution, which was on Patriots Day, which is today, if you don't count that one, if you're talking just sports, the original one was by Bobby Thompson when he hit the pennant-winning home run for the Giants, completing a season that saw the Dodgers blow a 13.5-game lead in August, only to have the Giants come back, go to the series on this shot heard around the world by Thompson. But Billy, the 51 season wasn't just about the comeback. It also featured a pretty good rookie on that Giants team.
Yeah, Willie Mays. Willie Mays was a guy they signed for $13,000 out of a little league that they were going to look at a pitcher, and they said, you got to look at this center fielder. Willie Mays was signed for $13,000. He got nothing, but the owner ended up giving him $5,000. So they put Mays down in the minor leagues, which was in Minneapolis. He hits 477. Durocher goes, what? No. We got to get that guy up here. We got to get him up here now. He had another situation, which Mark will talk about in a sec. But they do bring Mays up. They bring him up, and he's in Philadelphia. He goes 0 for 12. He's distraught. So Herman Franks goes to him and says, you got to talk to your guy, man. This something's wrong. So he goes over to Willie, who's in his little locker, crying. And Willie's saying, I can't do this. I can't do this. Like, I can't play here. And Durocher, being the guy that just had a good relationship with the majority of his players, says, hey, Willie, you're my center fielder. Do what you have to do. As long as I'm the manager, you will be in center field for me. And the rest is history with the Giants and Willie Mays.
Yeah,
I mean,
he struggles. Then I think he hits a home run off of Warren Spahn.
That's right.
Struggles a little bit more, but he really, I don't know if did he win Rookie of the Year? I think he does.
He did. He did.
So-
He did. But I think before his first game, when he hit the batting cage, the Philly players would stop and watch
That's
him.
right.
He had, this great stuff. But like I said, he got off to that slow start, but then he ended up winning Rookie of the Year. And then obviously he's involved in that Giants game, that team that comes back from 13.5 back of the Dodgers in August to tie them and force a 3-game playoff series. And then in game 3, bottom of the ninth, Bobby Thompson with a walk-off shot heard around the world game-winning homer.
Yeah, and then you think, Mark, that okay, here we go, sky's the limit for this kid, and it was true for the Say Hey kid, but something gets in his way.
It does. It's called the Army. So in 52, he has to leave in May. He starts this 52 season with the team, but then end of May he enters the Army, and he stays in there till March 1st of 54, where he's discharged. So basically 52 and 53 are lost years. But then he comes up in 54, and I believe in 54 they win the World Series. He makes the incredible catch off of Vic Wertz's ball in the Game 1 of the World Series, the greatest catch maybe in baseball history. And he's named the MVP that year. He would win the MVP the following year in 55. And between 1954 and 1973, he made 24 All-Star teams.
Ooh. Dang.
Wow.
Because, and you'll say, why 24? Because that's not 24 years. Because they played 2 All-Star games a few years
Yeah.
during that stretch. But anyway, yeah, his career was, yeah.
I never,
the Army, never looked back.
I never realized this, but you could certainly make the argument. So what, did he miss most of 52
Yes.
and all of 53?
Yes.
Yep.
So if he plays those years, he probably breaks Babe Ruth's home run record.
That's
I mean,
right,
I think Aaron even agrees that at their peak, Mays was the better player. Just Aaron had the continuity, the longer,
Right.
Well, there's a lot of people that think Mays is the greatest player ever.
Yeah.
That'll go on record and say Mays was the best player I've ever seen.
That 1951 season is really one to look back on. How did the Giants turn it around and win the pennant before Bobby Thompson won the pennant? There's lots of evidence that they did it the old-fashioned way, by cheating. That's right. Before the Astros won it all by banging a drum loudly, the Giants schemed their way to a pennant in much the same way. In the book, The Echoing Green, the untold story of Bobby Thompson, Ralph Branca, and the shot heard round the world, Joshua Prager details how a telescope and a buzzer was used to help the Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. And Joshua Prager joins us now to talk about that pennant stretch 74 years ago. Joshua, thanks so much for joining us today on the Past Our Prime podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So it's 1951 and the Dodgers are cruising. They are up 13 and a half games over the Giants in August. And then the season begins to flip. And it wasn't just that they started to play better, the Giants, that is, was it? What were they doing to help make up this ground?
Well, when I wrote this book, it actually grew out of an article that I wrote that ran on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, which came out 49 and a half years after Thompson hit his home run. So I sort of interrupted their great, year of celebration. The timing was coincidental that it was the 50th year. And what happened was I had met a guy named Barry Halper who had been a minority owner of the Yankees, and he was a great baseball memorabilia collector. And we were just talking. He loved to name drop, and he was the one who mentioned to me that he had heard that the Giants had been stealing signs in that magical season. And I asked him where he heard that, and he said from Ralph Branca. Now, of course, Ralph Branca was the losing pitcher that day, and so he had reason to believe that maybe Branca was, just sort of coming up with something to sort of soften the blow. And I said, well, do you believe this? And he said, I don't believe it. And I got off the phone and I was curious to sort of pursue it. And I saw that the rumors had been addressed all these years off and on, but no one had ever put anything forward that was concrete, nothing in the way of evidence. And I went back to the old sporting news. They used to list in the sporting news any single person affiliated with the team who got some World Series shares. They needed money back then. You didn't make the amount of money that Willie Mays was paid as a rookie in 1951 was equal to his World Series share, to give you a sense of how much this money mattered. And I started calling these guys and asking them if they knew anything about stolen signs. Some of them denied it immediately. Alvin Dark, famous, shortstop, said, I know nothing about it. I know nothing about it. He hung up on me. And other people said, I don't know what you're talking about. That was Wes Westrom, but he was much more pleasant, the catcher. And then it was very interesting. And it's usually this way, that the guys who are not very famous, who are not used to being called, who are happy to sort of be on the phone with you. It was Spider Jorgensen, sort of a utility player who had been let go in the middle of the year. And he told me that in the offseason, he'd gone out drinking, and it always happens that way. He'd gone out drinking with a guy who had been called up in the middle of the year, Hank Schenz, another utility player who had not had any at-bats, but he'd been a pinch runner. He'd scored a few runs. And he told him, Schenz told Jorgensen, and Jorgensen told me, that 49 and a half years prior at that point, now 74 and a half years prior, he had told him that he had brought with him a telescope to the team, where he had come, I think, from the Cubs, if I'm remembering correctly, where he had helped them to steal signs. And this was a Wallensack telescope, and I confirmed with a magazine, Sky and Telescope, that this telescope was perfect for looking at something as small as fingers being wiggled 500 feet away, and that they had used this telescope to steal the signs. And what was so exciting for me was little by little, and we could talk about how they did this, but little by little, I was able to nail down every detail of this sign stealing scheme, including knowing the day they started. It was July 18th, and Durocher, they were way back in the standings. July 18th, Durocher, the manager, famous, obviously, nice guys finished last, summoned the team together for a team meeting, and told them that they were going to be starting to steal signs. And they started, it was then a rain out, I believe, on the 19th, and they started stealing signs on the 20th. And no one noticed that that same day, Herman Franks, the backup catcher, he had been a catcher and the sort of Durocher's right-hand man, who had been the third base coach, he disappeared from the third base coach box, and Durocher took his place. No one asked, where the hell's Herman Franks? Well, he had gone to center field and started stealing the signs as a backup catcher. He was very good at that. And that's when they started. And we could talk about the details, but just to give you a little bit of background, that's what happened.
So this issue is part 3 of excerpts taken from the book by Leo Durocher called, as you just mentioned, Nice Guys Finished Last. I was going to ask you if he knew about it, and it's obvious that he did. Was everyone in on it? If he'd had a team meeting, I can't imagine that there was anyone that didn't. And were there any who were against it?
So he was the brainchild of it. He was the one who had the idea to do this. And, just so that the Giant fans out there don't think I have it in for them, I painted in great detail, the history of sign stealing in the game, including illegal sign stealing in the game using mechanical means. So they have this day. And one thing that made it easier for me, the way I was able to nail down the date, is a pitcher who joined the team that very day, Al Corwin, got there in the middle of the meeting. So he remembered this very, very well. There were some guys who did not like to do it, who did not like to use the signs. And it wasn't even for ethical reasons. There was later a pitcher who was not on that team, a religious Christian named Al Worthington, who in subsequent years, when the Giants stole signs, he didn't want any part of it, and they got rid of him. They got him off the team. But there were some guys. Whitey Lockman did not like the sign. He felt it interfered with his ability to simply react to the pitch ball. But other guys loved it, and almost everyone did. They wanted to know. Thompson and Mays and a lot of these players, they really benefited from it. And obviously, I also go into the book showing how it was really the pitching that took off after they started the signs, and not the hitting. But of course, we can never know how they would have been hitting had they not been stealing signs. And even if it helped them win just one game, there wouldn't have been a famous playoff. But they were all in on it. And little by little, they sort of honed their sign stealing system. So what they did was, and this was very fun to find a photograph showing this, they literally, the Polo Grounds was perfect for stealing signs for 2 reasons. It was the only ballpark in the National League that had the bullpen in fair grounds. The bullpen were in right center field. So far, far away. It was a strangely shaped ballpark, as you no doubt know, kind of like a horseshoe. And right center field was far away. People wouldn't really be paying attention to the guys out there by the warning track. And I include a photograph in the book showing what it looked like for the batter to look out at the right field bullpen. You could see them. They were far away, but it was an unobstructed view. Similarly, the other thing that really helped was center field was the Polo Grounds clubhouse was in center field. So it was directly aligned with home plate. And what they did was they cut a hole in the wire mesh of one of these windows. And you can literally see a photograph in the book where they cut the hole with this wire mesh. And then they set up on a tripod in the back of Durocher's office this telescope, this Wallensack telescope, where Herman Franks positioned himself. And he would spy the sign, and there was one thing that was nice for me, the 1949 Washington Post, it was an issue in 49 where they had timed exactly how many seconds elapsed between every pitch, every signal and the pitch. It was 11 seconds. And that was plenty of time for them to do this thing. So it was a spying of the sign. Then Franks would press a button. A guy, I it was wonderful. I was able to find the electrician. His name was Abe Chadwick. And he was my favorite guy to write about because he loved the Dodgers, but he worked for the Giants, this poor guy. And when he set this up, he didn't think there was a chance in hell it would come back to hurt him. He ends up dying a month to the day after the home run of cancer. Very sad story. But he sets up a buzzer where Herman Franks would press the button and the wire carried this buzzer, this noise into the bullpen in right center field. It would buzz once for a fastball, twice for an off-speed pitch. That was usually what they did. At which point, one of the players in the bullpen would then relay the signal to the batter. It was usually Sally Vars, who was a backup catcher. So it was three parts. It was spying it, pressing a button, and then relaying the sign. It took very little time for them to sort of get the signal. And they got good at it. On the very first day when they did this on July 20th, the buzzer was so loud that the guys in the bullpen, the first time it went off, they fell off the bench. They were terrified that someone would figure out what was going on. But no one did figure out. And then the next day, Chadwick made the buzzer quieter, and they got better and better and better at it, to the point that it was then, a well-oiled machine by the time October 3rd comes around. The interesting thing also is, of course, you played the same teams over and again. You only had 8 teams in a league, and so they really got to know these guys. It was something that they were very, very good at, and it certainly was it's not a coincidence, in my opinion, that it was this year, right after they instituted this, that they went on to win the pennant.
It's Josh, I was going to ask you about Abraham Chadwick. You already answered it, but I just thought that was just such an amazing little tidbit, that he was such a great fan of the Dodgers, and he ends up hurting him in the end, and things just obviously go bad for him. But I was reading something.
Yeah,
I was reading something that the Dodgers weren't completely sold that things were on the up and up. And there was one point that they were in the dugout and they almost blew this up before they got to the playoffs. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. I don't remember. I'm sorry, it's not fresh in my mind which game. I know exactly which game it was in because there were so many newspapers covering, the goings and the comings and goings of these teams back then, that you could find every little detail. And there was one game where they did. It was actually not Dressen. Dressen, I think, had been kicked out of that game, and it was the guy who had stepped in. I think it was Clyde Sukeforth, if I'm remembering correctly, who had famously been in the bullpen when Branca is warming up on October 3rd. And he was suspicious something was going on. They alerted the umps, just like you're saying, and the umpires actually issued a warning to the Dodgers for disrupting the flow of the game and saying, what the hell are you talking about, basically. One of the things that was interesting to me, there was only one guy who would not speak to me at all about this. I mentioned Dark. He ended up speaking to me a little bit about it later on. But Herman Franks, who was really the kind of the mastermind behind the whole thing, the guy who had to interpret the signs immediately and relay them. And he and Durocher were very tough guys. They had known each other for many, many years in the game. Herman Franks wouldn't speak with me. When I went out, when I was first writing my article, and I asked him about it at his home in Utah, and he says, I don't know what you're talking about. His wife, who's in the room with me, her name was Amneris. She goes, oh, Herman, please. But he wouldn't say a word. And after my article came out, after my book came out, right before he died, he told me he would speak with me. He was on oxygen, and I went out to speak with him. And, baseball players are human beings too, and I think it bothered him that he had kept this inside and never talked about it. And he told me something utterly fascinating. And we can talk much more about Thompson and Branca. They were wonderful men, both of them, and they were both, Branca was stoic and Thompson was humble to a fault. But Thompson later, initially, he sort of went back and forth. I don't like to think of something taking away from this and all that. And then he ultimately, as Branca became much more vociferous in his sort of, claims that everything had been stolen and he'd been wronged and Thompson was a thief and all that, Thompson then dug in his heels and said, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do this. But in the beginning, he'd sort of gone back and forth. And the only way I could imagine that Thompson hadn't known about the stolen signs, because he acknowledged to me that he was even availing himself of them earlier in that very game, But the way it made sense to me that maybe he didn't at that very final at bat was that Don Mueller, who had been sliding into third right before he came to bat, had an injury there. I believe he broke his ankle or he tore tendons. I don't remember right now. And he gets carried off the field, and there was a distraction. Clint Hartung is put in as the pinch runner and all that. Well, maybe I said to myself that distracted him from his regular routine. But Frank told me something fascinating, that the telescope was so powerful that what he did was, and you mentioned the Dodgers wondering what was going on there. Well, at one point he moved even deeper, farther back into the clubhouse so no one could see him, where he set up his tripod and everything. And he told me that what he would do, and I wrote a little article about this years after the book came out in the Wall Street Journal, that he would put the telescope, he would look at the finger signals and press his button. And immediately after he did that, he would tilt the telescope up to look at the eyes of the batter to see if the person looked out towards right center field. He actually did that, he said. And before I tell you what he said about Thompson, what was interesting is a few minutes after the home run, maybe like 20 minutes after the home run, there's bedlam in the clubhouse and everyone is just going crazy. And I found some audio of some of the interviews from there. And Franks is interviewed and he's drunk. He's drunk on scotch. And he says, even though no one asked him anything, he says, maybe we caught the sign for the pitch from Prager. That's what he says. So it obviously was in his head. Well, what ends up happening is he told me on October 3rd, 51, 3:58 p.m., he looks down at the fingers and then he tilts them up to Thompson's eyes. And yes, he saw Thompson look out towards right center field. And, I don't think Thompson is some evil guy. I actually think Thompson was a remarkably good human being. And it would really take something to know that it was there and to not look. All you do is shift your eyes. But he did do that, and he hits the home run. And, it was sad to me because he was such a humble guy, humble to a fault, the son of a Scotsman. Everything is like about self-deprecation. And he never took credit for much, but he took credit for that home run. But the fact that he had carried this all these years was difficult for him. He never even told his wife, his late wife, Winky, about it. He kept it as this big secret. And when I approached him all of those years later, I didn't want to ask him if he had stolen signs, because then he would have said, no, I didn't. And, as a way to not have to talk about this. So what I did was I talked to all the other guys I could from that list in the Sporting News first to put together the details of the sign stealing scheme. And only after I knew all the details did I call Bobby and say, sort of almost like in one breath, right when we got on the phone, look, I know this was going on. I know sign stealing was a part of the game. Your other guys told me the day it started, who was stealing it, who was relaying it, who the electrician was. I just want to know what it was like for you. And the first thing he said to me, the first words where he said, it was something I was never proud of, when he talked about that. And so then he invited me to go to church with him. And then it was more like, okay, now we'll be able to talk about it instead of deciding, whether or not it actually happened. It did happen. And then he was going to tell me what it was like for him all those years.
So I know you developed a relationship, like you said, with Thompson and maybe a little bit with Franks. So they did look back and there was regret on that. And would they have tried to be different if they could back in the day and do it differently?
So it's a good question. Franks, there was zero regret. He said, look, this is a part of the game. We all did it. And it's true. And I show how Dressen did it. But there, in my mind, is a difference between, using the naked eye and using telescopes. Now, I go through to show that they were hardly the first team to use telescopes. In fact, way back, there were like these crazy examples I found from the 1860s, the 1880s, where they had, I remember there was one team that had a buzzer wire under the feet of the third base coach, excuse me. And it was only discovered that they were doing this. It was a Philadelphia team because the third base coach was standing in a puddle. And they're like, well, why the hell would he be standing in a puddle? Something's going on there. And they literally ripped up the ground and found this buzzer box there. So I do show what was that they were not the first team to do this. And obviously no one cares if a team that loses is cheating. No one's looking there. But we care about the teams like the Giants and the Astros. But in my mind, it does take away from what they did. And it bothered them too. And and in 54, by the way, I don't go into this in detail in the book at all, but they did it again in 54. That's when they got rid of Worthington. And of course, they won the World Series in 54. So it bothered some of them more than others. Frank's was like, give me a break. Then again, I told you at the end of his life, he did want to talk about it. The guy it bothered the most was Thompson. It became the thing he was most known for. He ended up on a freaking stamp. They shot it around the world on a stamp. And it didn't sit right with him. He was such sort of a decent fellow. And if you went to his home, as I did many times, there was almost nothing on display showing that he was responsible for baseball's most famous moment. There was one or two little things there. But he really was a very, very humble man. And this bothered him. Branca, meanwhile, really wanted to say that it didn't bother him and he just rolled with life's punches. But it's not true. Over the course of 50 years, he changed. He didn't remember. He didn't want to remember that he had gone to the team and asked to change his number from 13 to 12. He told them he had liked to tell them they told him to change his number. No, it was a beautiful article in his local paper, the Daily Argus, in Yonkers. Where was he from? Mount Vernon, showing how he'd gotten together with his family and decided he wanted to change. And then you mentioned Sports Illustrated. There was a very powerful, I think it was 1962, maybe, there was a powerful little article where a Sports Illustrated reporter asks Thompson about it, asks Branca about the home run. And he says, you know what, why don't you go talk to the Giants about how they stole signs? So it did bother him from time to time. And what was fascinating, and as a journalist, it was a real lesson here. I had been sure that Thompson would not want to speak to me and Branca would want to speak with me. And the exact opposite thing happened when I first approached him. Thompson spoke to me and spoke to me and spoke to me. He wanted to be sort of unburdened of this. And Branca wouldn't speak to me because the few times he had spoken previously about it, people just said he was crying over spilled milk. And so you never know, like, how your subject is going to react. But of course, this becomes like, it starts really when they're on the Ed Sullivan Show and they sing this beautiful song, a retelling of a kind of a appropriation of this beautiful song, Because of You. And these guys had written beautiful lyrics for them. Branca actually had a beautiful baritone, so he sang very beautifully. And it was such a moving thing that they became like, partners and bound by this for the next 50 years, going to baseball card shows and doing all these things. So, it was an interesting thing, their relationship. It was obviously, they were good people. It was obviously also predicated on their not speaking about the signs dealing with each other. That was a difficult thing. And after my article came out, they did, and they got to a slightly more honest place, if a little less close. But, I came to feel very close to both of them, and I dedicated my book to them.
It's funny because you were mentioning like Herman Franks, and I remember as a kid when he was managing the Giants, I had a Herman Franks baseball card. So
Wow.
it brings back memories. But let's talk about the Dodgers-Giants rivalry.
Yeah.
People today, San Francisco, LA, it's an intense rivalry, but there's a distance between the cities. When it was Brooklyn and New York, talk about the intensity of that kind of rivalry back then.
Yeah, absolutely. There really is no equivalent today. You're exactly right. The only thing would be if it was like, in the very same city, Giants, Dodgers, or Yankees, Red Sox, or something like that. Obviously, same league, same town. They're playing each other constantly. It divided families. It divided classrooms. My father, who's 82 years old, he literally remembers not only the names of all the kids in his class, but which of the three New York teams they rooted for, because the Dodger fans sat together, the Giants fan, and the Yankees fans sat together. It was such an intense thing. I go into the rivalry together. There was violence that happened between the fans. There was a shooting. It was a very intense thing. It was, it was really, we don't have an equivalent today. The other thing is that baseball was kind of the unrivaled center of American sport. Before that, it was a little bit boxing and horse racing, believe it or not, that really kind of were the most intensely followed sports. But baseball was the king of American sport. New York was the center of that. And then this is like this perfect season where it's scripted out of a movie where all three New York City teams finished in first place. The Yankees, and then the Giants and the Dodgers tied. And then, of course, and obviously it's very famous, the numbers. They were 13 and a half games back in August. They then win 30. They go 37-7 down the road. This crazy stretch. The Dodgers didn't completely collapse. They went 23-21 over that stretch. And they end up in this exact tie. You then have, they split. And then, of course, bottom of the ninth, they're losing by 3 runs, and then they come back and win. It's just sort of like out of a movie. So, one of the other things that I'm like, well, why is it? There were other moments that were also remarkable. Like there was a Dodgers-Philly thing that happened the year before, a playoff that ends with a home run. Why is it this moment that we remember the most? And part of it is New York City. Part of it is, as you mentioned, Mark, the rivalry between these two teams specifically. And then there are other things too. It's that it was the first ever nationally televised sporting event. So everybody around the country was watching this thing, like everybody. Nowadays, if some television show dominates the airways, it has some, TV share, the percentage of households that are watching, I don't know, it's like something in the teens or 20%, and it was like 90 something percent. I write it in the book. And so everybody was watching this thing. And everybody thus remembered where they were when it happened. It was kind of a crazy thing for me, a very fun thing. So I'm writing this, 20 years ago. I would ask random older men and women on the street, just, do you remember where you were when Thompson hit the home run? And it was like a card trick, like 9 out of 10 people did. And one of the really fun things for me as a journalist was it was like this passport into anyone's life. I could write to the most famous people in the world and say, and they would get back to me because it was a fun thing for them to share. So for like a few years, my life was nuts. I was getting phone messages, from Supreme Court justices and presidents and actors, and anyone I wrote to would get back to me and tell me where they were when it happened. It was really, really fun. And that was one of the things that I enjoyed writing. I sort of had a whole section on people who fainted when it happened, people who dropped what they were holding, including their children, people who burst into tears, including some remarkable stories. And I also showed a person who died, who had a heart attack, and died because of this moment. So it was like a way to short. It was like taking these. If someone has a heart attack and you've got those electric things that you shock the body with. It's really what this moment was like on that Wednesday afternoon.
What people forget, though, is everyone thinks it was a 1-game playoff that he hit the home run, but it was a 3-game series. And had one team been up 1-0 and then this happened, it may not have had the same gravity as a winner-take-all thing where there's no turning back. One team wins, one team will lose.
Absolutely. And in fact, another thing that really made it lodge itself in the consciousness was that it was the bottom of the ninth. Unlike the 1950 playoff, there was no chance after that. It lands in the stands, the game's over. Someone I quoted called it an all-conclusive hit, like it was just over. And what's wild also is the ball was never found. Imagine nowadays it would be authenticated and sold for $10 million, but the ball was never found. And the great novelist Don DeLillo, he uses that fact as a way to write about mid-century America. He talks about the ball and he imagines this little black boy getting the ball and running home, and then what happens as a result. It's a great the opening chapter of his book is so incredible. It was released as a novella called Pafko at the Wall, because there's that famous picture of Andy Pafko looking forlornly up as the ball sort of goes over his head into the stands, and he imagines four guys together at the ballpark: Frank Sinatra, Toots Shor, who was this famous saloon keeper, Jackie Gleason, who was a superstar with the Honeymooners, and then J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI. And one thing that was fun for me personally was I'm like, where the hell did he get this? I imagine he didn't just make it up. And I finally got his address, wrote him a letter. He called me saying that the story was told that those four guys were at the game in a little memoir that was written by Jackie Gleason. And to cut right to it, I was able to confirm that three of the four were at the game, but one of them was not. J. Edgar Hoover was actually in the White House at the time that this happened. So, you don't have to let the facts get in the way when you're writing fiction.
Yeah. We're talking with Joshua Prager, author of the book The Echoing Green: The Untold Story of Bobby Thomson, Ralph Branca, and the Shot Heard Round the World. You mentioned how the scheme was. Herman Franks is in center field. He's got the telescope. There's a buzzer to the bullpen. Maybe I missed it, but the batters then look to the bullpen. What are the bullpen people doing to tell them what it is? They can't just be holding up a one. That people would see that, right?
Exactly right. So what they would do if there was a fastball coming, they would toss a ball in the air. Other times, which is something that anyone in a bullpen might be doing anyway, passing the time, or they would sit still and they would mix it up. They would not, in other words, they would do nothing. Sometimes they would get up and stretch, do various things. And I go into that in the book, sort of the ways that they alerted. As I say, it was basically an undetectable scheme. They had the perfect place to do it. And that's what I think makes it a little unfair. Like there was just no way that another team would be able to figure this out. And so, Durocher obviously knew that, and they put this scene to very good use. One thing I'll mention that's very interesting, that I found very interesting, is I go into details also about previously Durocher. Durocher loved to steal the signs, Dressen too. But Dressen had a huge ego. This bothered a lot of the guys on the team in the front office. Everything was about himself. He wanted to be like he was the guy. And I mention that because the Dodgers were eons ahead of other teams in terms of establishing scouting. And they had a guy named Alan Roth, and using statistics. Decades before this sort of saber revolution, they had a guy named Alan Roth, who was this brilliant statistician who came up with all of this information that he wanted to give to the team to use. How pitchers fared against batters, things like that. And Dressen didn't want it, and he banished Alan Roth to the press box. And Durocher didn't even have all that, but he did have a guy named Jack Carter, I think was his name, who used sort of more elementary metrics, but at least he gave him what he always considered the sort of best lineup on a given day, and he used that. So you had Dressen could have been using more information. He refused to use it, and he sort of managed more by hunch and intuition, and that really came back to bite him. I talk about how when Branca's warming up in the pen, Erskine is there too. Well, Erskine had even worse numbers against Thomson than Branca did, and Branca's numbers against Thomson were horrible. But there were a few guys on the team who actually did have good numbers against him, and he didn't want this information, and he didn't use it.
Well, I want to find out how was the relationship? Obviously, Branca gave up the home run, Thomson hit the home run. How did their relationship develop? Because there's always that picture that I saw of Branca sort of jokingly choking Thomson. How did that come about, and what was their relationship like?
Yeah, that was, I believe, at an old timers day where they were like joking around, mugging for the camera, things like that. So um, I mentioned that they sang in the off season in '51 on the Ed Sullivan Show, this song "Because of You," and that was the first time there was like real pathos there. People were truly moved. Literally, people were crying in the audience. You know, they felt for Branca, and he was this proud man with this beautiful voice. And Thompson was so humble. So that was really when they first come together. But then what happens is Branca is recovering emotionally. His career, his career is never the same. He talked about that he had suffered an injury. I go into that whether or not that actually happened, but his career is never the same. Thompson, meanwhile, suffers a triple break in his ankle, and he never pointed to his injury. He was never offered like alibis or why his career didn't sort of, because he was a truly gifted athlete. He had incredible speed, power. He could have been a Hall of Fame player. But anyway, what happens though is in 1954, Branca, or 57, Branca is traded to the Tigers, if I'm remembering correctly. And a pitcher named Ted Gray is his roommate. And Ted Gray had heard about the sign stealing from a guy named Earl Rapp, who had been on the Giants. And Ted Gray wants to make Branca feel better. And he tells him this. Now, what ends up happening is Branca is distraught because his life really hadn't been the same. Imagine for any of us or for any of your listeners, literally every day of your life, that's not an exaggeration. He was a famous man, Branca, hearing from some schmuck about your worst moment. And that's what it was like for him. He had to deal with this. He was a very religious Christian. That helped him. As an aside, I later wrote an article for the New York Times showing that he was actually, according to Jewish law, Jewish. His mother had not told him that she'd been born Jewish in Hungary before she came to this country. Talk about that later. But so he hears about this in 57. He's never really the same. He becomes very angry. He told me by his own admission, he was quick to fight. He didn't sleep as well. Life was harder for him. And so their relationship changes. There's like an edge to it. Branca has this anger. I mentioned that he once snaps to a Sports Illustrated reporter, why the hell don't you go ask? That was actually at the Old Timers Day. Why don't you go ask, the Giants about their sign stealing and all that? So there was an edge there. And Branca, of course, Thompson, of course, sensed that, and he was very gentle and kind and, sweet, but still, he was carrying the secret that he never shared until I spoke with him. After my article came out, they did get to a more honest place. They confronted this. They talked about it on the radio. They talked about it on television. They talked about it over and again. And I, for one, not just because I wrote the article, I really do believe that it's better to get to a more honest place while we're still alive. It's nice to not be carrying things. As I say, baseball players are people too, and it's hard. I don't think it bothered Durocher, but most people, felt most people have to carry that. And you know what? If we look to what happened with the Astros, I guarantee you that before all of those guys die, someone will go forward and talk about what it was like, whether it's Altuve, who most of us, I am not a conspiracy theorist, but I do believe he had some sort of a buzzer under his jersey. Why the hell didn't he let them take his jersey off? That's not easy. Someone will decide that they want to talk about this one day. And then we'll get sort of a more honest accounting of all that. So they got to this better place in terms of honesty. And I think that was a good thing for both of them to get there while they were still alive.
In the Sports Illustrated article where they're talking about Leo Durocher and his managing stuff, that 51 season also was a big year for the Giants because that was the debut of Willie Mays.
Yeah.
Talk about Mays and the struggles he initially had and then sort of turning it around very quickly.
Yeah, I think Durocher did a brilliant job with him. He knew that he had this sort of, once in a generation ball player there. And Mays was a kid. He was 20 years old. I mean, can you imagine? And the person who was like closest to an age was Chris Durocher, Durocher's kid's son. And they would often hang out and go out to restaurants together and things like that. He was very sensitive. And he starts off, as you say, it's like 1 for 21, I think. That first home run, that first hit, though, was a home run off Warren's spine, I think it was. So, he obviously, even from that start, he showed flashes of sort of his brilliance. Durocher took all the pressure off him. He said, like, I don't care if you don't get a hit all year. Just play defense for me. And, what happens is he starts to relax and play beautifully. And Thompson actually, more than anyone else on the team, helped him to know where to play the hitters. They both talked to me about that, how to position himself in the field, because it was Thompson who'd lost his job to him as a center fielder, and he moves to third base. And Thompson was like a mensch. Someone else would say, man, this kid took my job, but he didn't do that. He helped him. But he was a kid still to the end of that season, Mays, and he was still very, very sensitive. And he told me, as he had told others, that he was literally praying to God to not have to come up to bat in the bottom of the ninth inning. He was so nervous. And his prayers, of course, were answered. He's on deck when Thompson hits the home run, and he never does have to come to bat. Mays was someone who by many accounts on the team, he benefited enormously from the stolen signs, meaning he wanted them, and he was open and clear about that. I think it's almost like a harder thing and sometimes to know what's coming. For some people, I mentioned Lockman, but most people wanted to know, but he very much did, even though he was just a kid. But he was a delight to write about because, he doesn't just become Willie Mays, but he was also so young that you could write about his life off of the field. It's always fun when you're writing about a sport to be able to write about them as human beings and to know who they were off the field. And he was living in Harlem and playing stickball and all those sort of mythological things that we hear about. They were true. And it was great to talk to all the people who knew him back then. So he was a delight to write about.
So we do a segment on the show called 50-50. It's a trivia segment. I'm going to give you a 50% chance to get a question right from roughly 50 years ago. It's never exactly.
Okay, cool.
So since we just were talking about Willie Mays, I actually asked this question of Ron Say because Ron was a huge Mays fan. So true or false? Willie Mays once played a witch on a television show, a male witch.
False.
No, it is true. He was on an episode of Bewitched, which was a very popular show in the 60s and 70s. And they see him at this party and they go, Willie, isn't that Willie Mays? And they go, yeah. You mean he's a witch? He goes, how do you think he hits all those homers?
That's great.
Warlock.
Yes.
I have a really quick bonus one because you were talking about Branca singing and stuff, and they had a really good voice, and they were performing Because of You. True or false, the Dodgers years later did the same thing after winning the 81 World Series. They appeared on all these shows singing a cover of We Are the Champions.
I'll go true.
Yes, that is true, and very poorly compared to Branca and stuff like that. Because Jerry Royce, who was on our show last week, was one of the singers who performed that,
You guys have a fun job.
Yes. Josh, I can't get over that. When you talk about a song of a guy that gives up a game-winning home run, and there he is with the guy that hits it, singing on national TV. I just don't see Joe Carter and Mitch Williams doing that anytime soon. How do you get a guy? How do you get two guys to go on there and do that would never happen nowadays.
It was all on Branca. Like, a home run hitter, the hero, he'll go. But to have a Branca do it. And, it was very interesting. I just mentioned briefly how religious a man he was. And he was given, it was beautiful what religion did for him. He was a religious Catholic and he was totally crushed. And on the night of the home run, a cousin of his, who was a priest, sort of says, God chose you to suffer this because he knew your faith in him was strong enough to sustain it and all that, to carry you through. And it helped him enormously. And the other thing was he was engaged to be married to the owner of the team's daughter, Ann Mulvey. And he marries her, I think it was like 20 days later. So the rest of his life was sort of good and strong and healthy, and he just sort of persevered. But it's because of him that he went on, that Thompson and Branca were paired, because rare, you're right, Mitch Williams, I don't see that happening. They were quite a duo.
Joshua Prager is our guest, author of the book The Echoing Green, as well as The Family Row, which goes into great detail of the lives that were at the center of the most famous court case in U.S. history, Roe v. Wade. But Joshua, you also wrote a book called Half-Life, Reflections from Jerusalem on a Broken Neck. What can you
Yeah,
tell us about this book?
that was a little book. I'm a person who, like every other writer, has ego and wants people to read his work and all that. That was the only time I wrote something that I didn't care if anyone else read it. When I was 19 years old, so 35 years ago next month, I was sitting in the back of a bus in Israel that was hit by a truck, and I had a spinal cord injury. My neck broke. And I initially was a quadriplegic. I had a spinal cord injury, and I ended up a hemiplegic using a cane, meaning my body was divided vertically, using a cane and an ankle brace to kind of walk through life. And it actually has a bearing on what we're talking about with Thompson and Branca, because my life very much had a before and an after. 19 years old, and then everything after that was sort of once I was disabled. I loved baseball very much before, and I was a very good pitcher. I was going to play Division III college. I wasn't going to the majors, but I loved baseball. And I often found myself, and it wasn't like a conscious thing at the time, but we can all look back and see the patterns in our lives more clearly when we're older. I kept writing over and again about people whose lives also had a before and an after, where a moment really was like this hinge in their lives. And obviously that was the case for Thompson and Branca. I was very much thinking about this thing in a life. What is it like when everything changes in an instant? How do you deal with that? How do you reconcile yourself to that in terms of your identity and all of that? And that was something I think that really drew me to this story. In terms of that book on disability, I will tell you, I gave a TED Talk connected to it. So if you Google me and put in my name, there are two TED Talks. One of them is about meeting the man who caused that bus accident.
It's excellent.
Oh, thank you. And so I wrote this little book that led up to that TED Talk. We ended up taking it was only an ebook. It wasn't even going to be published, but my agent said, well, why not? You're giving this talk. People can read what you think, your thoughts on disability and identity. But all of these years later, I'm going to write I'm going to add a few chapters to that book, and then the book will be released actually as a proper book on paper. So in another few years, it will come out. I'm writing about becoming a father and these other things that are now a big part of my life.
I saw the TED Talk, and it moved my wife to tears. It's just such a beautiful. I love how you talk about how contrast is needed in our lives. That
Thank you.
that to go through these moments, you need to have perspective on what you had before and what you've lost and now what you've gained back. So,
Well, thank you. I'm not a person who says that everything happens for a reason. I don't look at life that way. But I do believe that sometimes there are like these sterling silver linings to a cloud. And there really is one in the case of when a difficult thing happens. Because it's difficult, you're so much more mindful of the good. So, because of contrast, and I use a quote from Herman Melville to talk about that. And obviously, again, that was something that very much fits in with Branca's life, where, he held all that more closely to all of the good things and cherished those things all the more after this very, very difficult experience that he went through.
Josh, I don't want to bring it back to myself. You faced Abed, who obviously was driving the truck that hit you.
Yeah.
I was head on by a drunk driver many years ago on the freeway, and I faced him. How did you mentally get yourself in the position where you're sitting with someone that obviously has changed your life in many ways and not have that anger with you? Because I met the guy that hit me, and I wasn't happy when I met him. So how did you do that?
That's an interesting thing. I guess, so this was a guy who caused this bus accident that permanently disabled me. I'm not Gandhi, like I'm capable of anger. But at that point, it was a lot of years had gone by, 20 years had passed. And it was weird. The one thing that was helping me, and there's a lot of medical literature that backs this up. If you are able to write about something it is very, very good for the victim, for the person who has suffered through something. It's very, very helpful to you physically, not just sort of mentally, emotionally. Your body feels better. And I was writing this little book, and I had finally been able to get my arms around the enormity of what happened, and get my arms around like who I was and identity, and not just feeling that I'm a victim, that I'm not just defined by this thing, but I'm actually, who I was beforehand. Yes, I've now, whoever that was has now had to sort of, it's like genes plus experience equals who you are, right? So I still had that experience, but I was me. I was still me, the person who I'd always been. And in writing about this, it helped me enormously. And so when I went to him, I almost had like my journalism hat on, as opposed to sort of my like disability hat on. And I wanted to sort of fill in these missing pieces to understand, who he was and where he was from. And he was now known to me, which was very helpful. It was a very strange thing having this enormously influential person in my life be a complete unknown to me. So while it was disappointing and, very disappointing, he didn't say, I'm sorry, he didn't offer that. I nonetheless left there sort of feeling that I was in a better place than I'd been before I went to see him. And I was able to kind of turn the page. And that was very, very helpful to me. And I would say that that's not specific only to me. There are other people too who have, like, I'm not Ronald Reagan, who after he's shot, he's going and absolving, like when the Pope. It wasn't like I was absolving him. It was more just like, okay, I now know who this guy is. And there was a line in my TED Talk that I've heard from most people, was the line that sort of reached them the most, which was saying he wasn't a particularly bad man. He wasn't a particularly good man. He was a limited man. And I go into what I mean by that. And to sort of know who this person was, that was very, very helpful to me.
Well, I can say that you're a very good man, and much better man than I am, I think. So I guess we never know until we're put into these situations, and God forbid some of us have to go through them. Next year will be the 75-year anniversary of the shot heard round the world. Do yourself a favor. Go and get the book, The Echoing Green by Joshua Prager. Josh, this has been a really fun and interesting conversation, and I thank you for joining us today.
Well, I was honored that you reached out, and I appreciate the kind words, and it's great what you guys do. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
You're a great person, man.
Thank you, William.
Great person.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, moving on. Let's talk a little TV, radio, and actually some free TV. Billy, for the first time since 1996, who's going to be on TV for everyone to see?
Since 96?
Since 66, 1960.
I'm joking.
Did I say 96?
I'm just kidding you. Muhammad Ali, Ron Lyle plan on fighting in 1996. No, sorry. No, they're going to be fighting 1975. And it actually turned out to be a good fight. But I think going back, you think Muhammad Ali, charismatic, great champion, for him to be on free TV, unbelievable. But Lyle did give him a fight. He bloodied Ali's nose in the first. He would lose by TKO in the 11th. But still, that idea that Muhammad Ali on free TV on ABC, that you, I, and everyone else could watch it with our little turning buttons is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I believe, on Wide World of Sports, if I'm not mistaken, on Saturday. And I remember watching Ali fought Ken Norton, and that was also on ABC. Wow. It was also live, and that was when Norton upset and beat Ali. So they did have a deal, I think, with ABC where there would be some boxing matches I would get on free TV. Never
those
happened.
Deals are gone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's not the only big-time boxer that will be on live TV. We mentioned this at the top of the show, but George Foreman, when he fights those 5 people all in one night, that's going to be on TV for everyone to see. So this was right about the end. I mean, like they said, they hadn't been on free TV in a while, but I remember seeing Muhammad Ali fight Jimmy Young and And I remember watching Ray Boom Boom Mancini,
Yeah.
and
Right.
Yeah.
they would have good fights on TV in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, that Mancini Dooku Kim fight.
That's
when
I was just
Kim
about to
died,
mention that.
That
Yeah.
that was on CBS. That
That was
was a
like a
live event.
Saturday
Yeah.
afternoon.
Yeah.
Boy, that was, I mean, obviously a tragic ending, but it was an incredible fight. So,
Yeah.
Mark, of course, we just lost boxing legend George Foreman not even a month ago. Last October, we had his daughter Georgetta on the show when it was the 50-year anniversary of the Rumble in the Jungle, never knowing that less than 5 months later, Big George would no longer be with us.
Yeah, it was like I would have loved to meet him. And when we were talking to Jetta, the fact he loved to sit and watch westerns, man, I wish I could have gone down to his ranch and sit and watch westerns with him one afternoon and just have a conversation. That would have been so great. Um, I remember, and then he did an autograph for my father-in-law, who was a big Foreman fan. I'd asked Jim Lampley, who was doing the boxing with George, if he could get an autograph, and he got one for me. And my father-in-law was thrilled.
About.
Back where he belongs. Hank Aaron spent the first 12 years of his major league career in Milwaukee before the organization relocated to Atlanta. After 9 years in the South and a year after setting the all-time home run record, he's back in Milwaukee with the Brewers. Obviously his best days are behind him. I looked at his numbers from 75 and 76. I think he hit 22 home runs, and he just wasn't the same player, but he did always have a special place in his heart for Milwaukee.
But also
Right.
just think of the marketing part of it. You're
Yeah.
marketing Henry Aaron back where he started, and they traded Dave May and Roger Alexander for him. I think just that alone, I think they could have gotten more for Aaron, but
Elsewhere, the A's are without Catfish Hunter, so they gave 20-year-old Mike Norris a spot in the rotation. The young righty spins a 3-hit shutout in his major league debut. Go on to have one great season in 1980 when he should have won the Cy Young Award. Not that I'm holding any grudges against Steve Stone, but Norris was spectacular in 1980. And Billy, what about Nolan Ryan?
Well, I'm just going to say Nolan Ryan was a pretty good pitcher, but I tell you what, he even admitted he had his worst stuff since opening day of the last year, the worst stuff, and he still shut out the White Sox 5-0, allowed 6 singles. Jeez, the worst stuff ever, and he's still shutting guys out. Dang.
All right, Mark, make us some money.
Oh yeah, we got a great ad here, and they've done this ad before, but it's for the all-time ugliest car ever made, the AMC Pacer.
Pacer. Oh.
As they call it, the first wide small car, which it's like the first tall short car. No, but anyway, it's like no other small car is as wide as our Pacer. So naturally, you get an unusual amount of room, and so I'm going. So it just means it has a fat butt. That's all it means.
Hey, that's a big thing these days.
It might be, yeah. But yeah, no, pretty ugly, pretty hideous.
I think if you're marketing a car that can fit a lot of fat butts in it, it would do very well in 2025.
Nowadays. Yeah. We all love fat butts, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I cannot
Sorry.
lie.
Big butts. Do not lie. That's right.
Attles battles no longer. Head coach of the Golden State Warriors, Al Attles, who was known, and I didn't know this, as the Destroyer in his playing days. The NBA used to have what in the NHL we would call goons, guys who would annihilate you if you came in the lane. Attles was one of those guys, except for in the article, it says he was a 6-foot point guard. I remember Attles as being this really intimidating man. But that's just because of how he presented himself. I was only 7 years old in 1975, but I never knew that he was, actually a small guy by NBA standards. Probably his most famous melee occurred during a 1965 game with the St. Louis Hawks in Omaha, when 6'9" Zelmo Beatty slugged a teammate of Al's underneath a basket. Attles took off from the free throw line, putting a shoulder into Beatty and knocking him well up into the stands. As they rolled among the terrified spectators, Beatty grabbed Attles' nose and ripped his nostril. Oh. But all present agree that it was Beatty who came away for the worse for wear. So Al Attles was not someone you wanted to mess with.
What's interesting about Attles is that he was So he played from 60 to 71. From 68 to 70, he was not only a player, he was assistant head coach of the San Francisco Warriors. And then starting in 1970, he became their head coach. So he was a player coach for, several years with the Warriors before he, just stuck to coaching.
And also, Scott, I want to mention, you're talking about Zomo Beatty. Zomo Beatty was 6'9".
Yeah.
So he had Addles by, 8 inches. I mean, and Addles still just pounded people.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us, Billy, about the rookie that got.
Oh, yeah. He said, in one exhibition game, an ambitious rookie came down court and slyly hooked Addles, who was called for fouling. "Don't do it again," the destroyer said darkly. A few plays later, the rookie did it again. One punch, and the youngster was flat on his back. The referee quickly jumped on him and whispered, "Hey, kid, stay down. It may be the last time you get up."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like when the impartial referee is saying,
Yes.
"Stay down,"
Yes.
you might want to listen. He was great friends with Wilt Chamberlain. He was the best man at Addles' wedding. And on the night Wilt scored 100 points, Addles had 17, going 8 for 8 from the field and hitting his only free throw. A perfect night for Addles, but all anyone remembers is Wilt scoring 100 points.
Yeah. Loser, that Wilt.
All right, getting into the big picture. Women in sports broadcasting. They've come a long way since the early days, and in 1975, those were the early days for women in sports. Columnist Art Buchwald wrote that he was taken completely by surprise when he heard this strange high voice commenting on a TV football game. He said he thought Pat Summerall had a serious operation. Quote, "How could a multi-billion-dollar network invade the house of 30 million beer-drinking, potato-chip-eating, red-blooded American football fans with the voice of a girl?"
We've heard that a lot in these years.
Yeah. Art Buchwald, not a fan. I have to admit, I think the hardest part for avid male sports fans to listen to a female broadcaster, and I would even put myself into this, is you just have to get used to it. Your ear is not used to hearing anything but a male voice.
Yeah.
And so you're like, "What's this? That's not what I'm used to." And people, they're not quick to adapt. They don't like change. But, nobody has any issue with men doing women's sports.
No.
That's been happening for forever. So I really think in another 10, 15 years, I don't know, it will be a non-issue. It will be, do they know what they're talking about?
Yep.
And are they credible with what they're saying?
Yeah, I mean, Susie Colbert was amazing at what she did. Carissa Thompson's good at what she does. Erin Andrews, there are a lot of women out there that are really good, but back in the day, man, they were held to a different standard. Because you're right, Scott, people weren't ready to hear a woman be on air talking about their sports.
Well, there's a lot of sexism in our society, and it still exists even today.
It is.
So,
well, and in the sports world in particular.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we're around it, so we've, sort of been part of seeing it.
I worked the Olympics with Leslie Visser, one of the nicest people and most prepared and universally liked reporters I ever worked with. And, back then, everybody knew Leslie. Dee Lynam is the daughter of Jim Lynam. I worked with her before she was even on TV. And let me tell you, she knows hoops as well as certainly better than I do, that's for sure. And then at the NFL Network, I've worked with Aditi Kikibwala and others. I would fly to Pittsburgh from New England, and Aditi would ask what I thought about what she was going to say about the Steelers. And I would almost laugh. I'd say, "Aditi, you live and breathe Steelers football. What you're going to say is perfect. I mean, why would you ask me? I didn't need to correct her. She knew what she was talking about." So now I've worked with some, and we have as well, that they were on TV because they wanted to be on TV. They were pretty. The fiance of Jeff Bezos and another woman that played out on Monday Night Football. They were not. But you've worked with men that are that way as well. It goes both ways. So,
but in this article, they did mention one of the famous athletes. They said Oscar Robertson was interviewing Bill Walton just 2 weeks into the season, and Robertson actually said, "Okay, just one more question, Big Bill. We'll let you hit the shower. Can you still catch the Lakers?" And it was 2 weeks into the season. They said if a woman had said that, they would just be taking over the coals. But for
Yeah.
Oscar Robertson's like, oh, come on, that's the Big O.
Right.
Different standard.
Different standards. Still true to this day. They're definitely held under a microscope.
But I do like Lee Arthur. Lee Arthur was one of the beginning women. She says, Arthur says she's not the prettiest sportscaster in the country. She said Frank Gifford is. And she says it's difficult to get her best side on camera because I'm sitting on it.
Oh, God.
Good for Lee. Nice. I bet you her butt would fit in that car.
Yes, right. That's right. Probably the
And Bill, didn't you say there was a woman in here that was just getting started that 50 years later is still an anchor in New York?
Yeah, Liz Bishop. She's an anchor in New York. I didn't write the station now, but she's now the evening anchor. So she's been there through this whole time. Yeah, Liz Bishop. She's been there since 74 and she's still there now. And she's still, I mean, looks like she's 30, but yeah. So I thought maybe we'd reach out to her and maybe she can come on and say what it was like back in the day and give us a history lesson on how great these women were.
Yeah. For the record, Billy.
Oh no, it's my irritation. Kings had a great season. They lost to the Maple Leafs in 3 games after not losing to them at all during the regular season.
Yeah, when swept them in 4 or 5 games. 3. No, I mean in the regular season.
Oh yeah, they slept them in 4. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we talked with Rogie Vachon about this.
Yep.
This was like the Kings' breakthrough year.
Yep. And then the Maple Leafs went on to getting swept by Philadelphia, which obviously went on to win the Stanley Cup. So not saying the Kings would have been done better against Philadelphia, because back in those days, the Flyers owned the Kings, but I would have liked to have seen that.
So Billy, this is 75. You're 12?
Yeah. 11.
So 11. So do you remember this?
Vaguely, yeah. Yeah, they used to be on a KHJ for occasional games, and I'd listen to it on the radio. That was another thing about rollerball going back. Bob Miller was the announcer.
Right.
On that. So was Dick Enberg. But yeah, I used to watch a lot, and it was always with the Kings, you just knew they were going to score a lot and they wouldn't play decent D, but you do remember that year as being just an absolutely shocking team because they hadn't done that ever. But they had a bunch of guys of really no-name guys in a lot of ways, minus Butch Goring, Rogie Vachon, maybe 1 or 2 others, and they put it all together. But when they came to the playoffs back in those years, it was usually 1 and out.
And think of that, a best of 3. Oh, yeah. Boy, that's tough. Mark.
I've got a very sad story in For the Record. Fred Prender, who was the head football coach at Bucknell University, has a heart attack and dies. He's just in his 40s. His 5-year record wasn't impressive, but he did lead Bucknell to a winning season the year before, which had been his first since the mid-60s. So it's always so sad when, these coaches or anybody dies so young like this.
Yep.
Wow, bringing us down.
The famous one, obviously, is UCLA. Now I'm blanking. And the fifth, we've talked about him before. He, in the 50s, made UCLA a powerhouse. And then he died. He was found dead in a hotel room.
Wow.
With a lady of the evening.
Elvira?
That's Mistress of the Dark.
Oh, sorry.
It was Red Sanders. It was Red Sanders.
Man.
I think it was 50s when he died.
You should have brought that down.
Yeah, I'm ready to cry now.
I know.
Red Sanders would be over 100 by now.
I know. Still coaching.
Well over. And still with the ladies of the night, Elvira.
Damn it. Mistress of the Dark, ladies of the evening. Come on.
Late faces in the crowd, Mark.
I've got one, Tony Darden, who is a junior in Norristown, Pennsylvania area high. He set the high school record for the 300-yard dash. He had a 30.6. He ran it at the Philadelphia track and field meet. His time broke the previous record. He ended up going to Arizona State, where they won the national championship in 1977. And I think he was ranked the #1 400-meter relay person in 1979 in the United States. And in 2007, he was inducted into the Penn Relay Wall of Fame. So he had a very successful track career.
Billy, 19th hole.
Just about a guy talking about the rookies. He said, you're sure this is the best year he can recall? Well, I guess about the NBA rookies. Said, well, I guess the best year since 1956, when Bill Russell, Willie Knowles, and Tom Heinsohn came into the league, might be 1970. Listen to these guys that broke into the NBA. Charlie Scott, Dave Cowens, Bob Lanier, Dan Issel, Jim McMillan, Rudy Tomjanovich, Pete Maravich, Nate Archibald, Sam Lacey, Calvin Murphy, Jeff Petrie, Rick Mount, among others. So we said that Marvin Barnes, John Drew, Leonard Gray, Keith Wilkes, and Scott Webman, please remember the impact of the 1970 grads had on professional basketball. You go to hell. He didn't say the last part. I added that.
Yeah, that's an ad lib.
Yes, thank you.
But that 1970 team, you could win a couple games with that crowd.
Yeah, even though wasn't didn't the Big O come out and say that Pete Maravich really wasn't that great a player because his dad made him shoot too much?
Yeah,
that was recently.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. Said he really didn't live up to the potential that he had. I think it was pretty good.
He was not too bad.
No.
I mean, was he? He was the original flashy. And so you got to find out, is he all flash or can he play? And I would argue that he could play.
Yes. Yes.
Next week, the NBA playoffs in 1975 are underway, and Boston Braves. How about that? Buffalo Braves are making some noise. We'll talk to the cover man of the April 28th, 1975 issue of Sports Illustrated, Gar Hurd, as he and Bob McAdoo are lighting it up in Buffalo. He would go on to make one of the most famous shots in NBA history. We'll chat with Gar next week. Join us then. Thanks to Joshua Prager for joining us today about those cheating Giants back in 51. We're done. That's Bill. That's Mark. I'm Scott. And we are, what are we, guys?
Past our prime.
Is that right?